They told us the war was over. They printed it on banners, broadcast it across 17 star systems. The Dominion High Council called it the Resolution. Clean, diplomatic, the kind of word that sounds like healing and means surrender. They held ceremonies. There were flowers, or whatever passes for flowers on Keth Prime. There were speeches about sacrifice and the cost of peace, and never again. We believed them. She didn't. Because here's what the banners didn't mention. What the Council's clean diplomatic language carefully stepped around like a body in a hallway. The resolution came after the Verith Armada glassed Sector 9. After 3 colonies. After 240,000 registered civilians. After 1 family. 1 school. One girl who was sitting in the 3rd row of a classroom learning long-form stellar cartography when the sky turned the color of something that has no name in any language I've encountered. And then there was no classroom. No 3rd row. No school. Just her. They told us the war was over. She's been preparing her answer ever since. And I, Sub-Commander Revik Aul, Field Intelligence Officer, 12-year career, 3 citations, 1 drinking problem I will not be acknowledging. I have the singular misfortune of being the one assigned to track her. I thought it would be a routine containment operation. I thought a lot of things before I met Mara Cole. This is what happened. The first time I saw her on a surveillance feed, I laughed. I want to be honest about that. It matters. Not because it reflects well on me, but because I think about it constantly now. As in the way you think about the last moment before you stepped somewhere you couldn't step back from. The last moment of a certain kind of certainty. I laughed. Took a sip of the pale grey ration brew that the forward base tried to pass off as coffee. It tasted like old engine coolant filtered through something's kidney. And I laughed. She was small. That was the first thing. Not small like our lighter infantry builds, where the lack of mass is compensated by exoskeletal reinforcement and redundant joint systems. Small like something that had been made for a different world, with a different gravity, and was now walking around in ours as though the discrepancy was a personal insult it intended to address. She couldn't have been more than 20 cycles by human reckoning. Maybe less. The feed was grainy. Outer perimeter, Sector 4, which was technically neutral territory and practically a ruin. The Verith had pushed through there 18 months prior. They'd pushed through a lot of places. That was before the resolution, before the banners, before the Council's very clean and diplomatic language. Now, Sector 4 was a border zone, monitored but not garrisoned, a place the war had chewed through and then spat out and left alone. She was walking through it like she owned it. No, that's not right. Owners are casual. They've stopped looking for threats because they've forgotten there were ever threats to find. She walked through it like she was reading it, head on a slight tilt, eyes moving in a pattern I couldn't quite pass from the surveillance angle. She'd pause at a collapsed junction. Crouch. Study the debris configuration. Stand. Move. She did this 7 times in the 43 minutes of archived feed I'd been handed. What am I looking at? I asked Operational Analyst Veth, who was standing beside my console eating something orange and semi-solid from a sealed pouch and not offering me any. Human girl, Veth said. I can see that. Orphan, former education sector resident, Sector 9. He paused, looked at me. Pre-resolution. Pre-resolution. The word that meant before the sky turned that color with no name. I stopped laughing. She's been in the neutral zone for 6 days, Veth continued. Perimeter sensors flagged her on day 2. Or command assumed she was a scavenger. Strays come through occasionally. He took another slow bite of his orange thing. Then she started mapping. Mapping. We think. The movement pattern, the pauses, the crouch and study. Our pattern analysis unit says it matches pre-infiltration reconnaissance methodology. Specifically, it matches a Terran military doctrine called... He squinted at his notes. Graduated terrain familiarization. Though it's a ground assault preparation technique. I looked back at the feed. At this small human girl with her tilted head and her reading eyes, walking through rubble like she was composing a letter. She's 20, I said. 19, actually, we think. She's 19 years old and she's doing pre-infiltration reconnaissance on a neutral zone border. We think? Of what? What's on the other side of Sector 4? Veth lowered his orange pouch. Forward Supply Hub 7, he said. Verath Logistics, one of the 3 main distribution nodes for their holdover garrison on Keth Reach. I set down my terrible grey brew. That was 6 days ago. Her file was 17 pages long, which sounds like a lot until you account for the fact that 4 of those pages were just damage assessment reports. What had been lost? What no longer existed? The bureaucratic language of obliteration. Colony structure, non-viable. Population registry, incomplete. There's cross-reference records, destroyed in event, as though it were a weather pattern. Her name was Mara Cole. She was born on Veth Colony 9, a mid-tier agricultural settlement, nothing strategic, which was either a cosmic irony or a cosmic banality depending on your theological inclinations, and I had none left. She'd been enrolled in the settlement's secondary education program. Stellar cartography, logistics theory, and basic engineering, the kind of curriculum designed for children who would grow up managing colony infrastructure. Practical. Grounded. There were 2 parents in the registry, 1 younger sibling, an address. Coordinates that no longer corresponded to anything with walls. After the resolution, after the council's ceremony, and the flowers and the never again, the surviving human population had been distributed across refugee integration centres throughout the Allied systems. Ismara Cole had been logged into Integration Centre Reva. She'd been assigned a bunk, a meal schedule, a counselling rotation. She had stayed for 11 days. Then she was gone. That was 14 months ago. I had 14 months of nothing, and then 6 days of surveillance footage of a 19-year-old girl reading ruins, and 1 operational analyst eating something orange, and Hub 7 sitting on the other side of the border like a question I didn't want answered. So I requested a field assignment. My commanding officer, Director Sorath, who had 4 arms, 0 patience, and a disposition roughly equivalent to a mineral deposit, looked at my request for an extended beat before she said, "Sub-Commander All, you are an intelligence officer. Your function is analysis and oversight. Your function is not..." Another pause, heavy. Field tailing of unregistered human adolescents. "She's pre-infiltrating Hub 7, I said. "You think?" "The pattern is one possible interpretation of a traumatized refugee's erratic movement through a rubble zone." Sorath set down my request form in a way that suggested it might as well have been on fire. "Send a surface unit to intercept and redirect her. She's likely just... If she's just a traumatized refugee wandering in grief, we redirect her," I said. "And if she's not... If she's been out there for 14 months building towards something, and we send a surface unit that spooks her or she doesn't come quietly, then we detain her. And then what? Refile her to Integration Centre Reva? Lock her in another bunk?" I picked my terrible brew back up, drank the end of it. It had gone fully cold, which made it simultaneously worse and slightly less offensive. "She'll leave again, and next time she'll know we're watching." Sorath looked at me for a long moment. "You want to surveil her? Up close?" "I want to understand what she's planning before she plans it," I said. 14 months of nothing followed by graduated terrain familiarization on a logistics hub is not grief wandering. Something changed. Something triggered the clock. What clock? I don't know yet. Another long silence. Sorath was very good at silences. She'd weaponized the pause the way some officers weaponize volume. "You have 9 days," she said. "Then I send the surface unit regardless." Getting into Sector 4 was not pleasant. It smelled like the resolution of a fire, not active burning, but the long chemical aftermath, the mineralized char that embeds itself in porous surfaces and just stays there, asserting its history at anyone who wanders through. One of the structures that were still standing had the exhausted lean of things that had survived something they hadn't been built to survive. Everything had a greyish cast in the low system light. I found her on day 2. Or she found me, which is I'll admit it, a distinction with consequences. I was doing a careful sweep of the eastern quadrant, working off the surveillance footage's movement pattern, the logic mapping where she was likely to bed down given the wind direction and the least unstable structural configurations, when something hit me in the back of the shoulder. A thrown piece of duracrete, I discovered later, hand-sized, aimed with precision. And I spun around with my hand on my sidearm, and she was standing 12 feet away, not holding a weapon, both hands visible, watching me with an expression that I struggled to categorize. Not fear, not aggression, something more like assessment. "You've been behind me for an hour," she said. Her voice was lower than I'd expected. "Steady." "I'm not going to detain you," I said, which was the honest answer, and possibly a tactical error. "I'm intelligence. I want to talk." She looked at my hand, still half reaching for my sidearm. I moved it. She tracked the movement. "You throw rocks at everything you want to talk to?" I asked. "I wanted to see what you do," she said. And? She seemed to consider this genuinely. "You didn't shoot?" "I try not to shoot unarmed 19-year-olds on principle." "I'm 20, she said. "Which? Fine. Close enough." I introduced myself. Full designation, rank, function. The kind of transparency that my training categorized as a calculated vulnerability, and that I deployed because I had approximately nothing else to offer that would keep this conversation going. She told me her name. I already knew it, but I let her give it to me like I didn't. We stood in the wreckage of whatever building this had been. There were tiles still visible under the debris, small pale squares, the kind used in educational facilities for easy clean maintenance. And she watched me the way she'd been watching the ruins, reading. "Hub 7, I said. Nothing in her face. "We know what you've been doing out here," I said. "The movement pattern. We ran it against Terran military doctrine." She said. "That's all? What do you want me to say?" "I want you to explain what a 20-year-old with a cartography education and no military training is planning to do with a pre-infiltration assessment of a Verith logistics installation." She was quiet for a long moment. Around us, something structural shifted and groaned. Just the building settling, just physics. But we both went still for it. 19, she said. "What? You said 20. I'm still 19 for 6 more days." I stared at her. She almost smiled. Not quite. The expression didn't make it all the way. But the shape of it was there, like a word started and then reconsidered. "My cartography education," she said, "was better than most military mapping programs. Colony 9 had a very good program." A pause. "It was a very good colony." Was. Present tense abandoned. Just was. Dropped in the middle of the sentence with no ceremony. And she moved past it before I could register it properly. "I know what's in Hub 7, she continued. "I've been mapping the supply rotation for 6 months. Not from here. From data intercepts, archived logistics feeds, trader manifests, cross-referenced against the Varath standard garrison supply doctrine." She tilted her head slightly. The same tilt I'd seen on the surveillance footage. Hub 7 supplies 3 garrison clusters. It's if the hub experiences a significant disruption, a cascading failure in the distribution network, those garrisons go dark for a minimum of 32 days. I said nothing. 32 days is long enough, she said. Long enough for what? The almost smile again. Not quite reaching. "There are 14 other people like me," she said. "Pre-resolution survivors. We've been coordinating." The tiles under my feet. Pale, small, educational. Clean floor tiles. The kind found in schools. I thought about my 9 days. "You need to talk to my director," I said. "No," she said. "I really don't." Mara. They killed my family in a colony that had 48 children under 10 years old. Her voice hadn't changed. Same pitch, same steadiness, like she was still discussing logistics doctrine. The resolution didn't include any acknowledgement of that. No accountability, no consequence. The garrisons that carried out the strike are still active. A pause. I've had 14 months. I've been very organized about it. I thought about my terrible grey brew going cold on a console somewhere. I thought about how I'd laughed. If you go in there without authorization, I started. I know, she said. You could be killed. I know. 14 people against a logistics hub. 15, she said. I don't usually count myself. The building groaned again. Low system light through the collapsed ceiling, pale and flat. The chemical smell of aftermath. I had 7 days left. I had a report to file. I had a director who had given me a window and a surface unit waiting on the other side of it. Give me 3 days, I said. I didn't know why. Don't move. Don't signal your people. Give me 3 days. She looked at me for a long moment. Reading. Why? She said. And honestly, I had no clean answer. My training didn't have a module for this. My career citations didn't cover this specific configuration of variables. So what I had was a girl standing in the ruins of something that used to have clean floors and 48 children, with a look on her face that wasn't rage and wasn't grief and wasn't either one of the things I had vocabulary for. Because if you do this wrong, I said, you die and nothing changes. She was quiet. 3 days, I said again. She looked at the collapsed ceiling, at the pale tiles visible under the debris. 3 days, she said. I filed my first report that night and told Sorath the surveillance target was a scavenger operating alone, minimal strategic relevance, pending further observation. I sat with my cold, terrible brew for a very long time after. I've done a lot of things in 12 years that I'm able to explain, able to walk through the logic, produce the rationale, point to the operating parameters and say, here, this is where the decision lived. I cannot explain what I did next. I can only tell you what it felt like. It felt like standing in a school. I want to describe what 14 months looks like when it's been organized. I came to her camp on the second day. She hadn't made a camp so much as occupied a position. There's a difference, and I know it now. I didn't then. A camp is where you rest. A position is where you wait. The distinction lives in everything. How the supply cache is layered by priority of access, not convenience. Where the bedding sits, close to 2 separate exit routes. What's visible from outside, nothing relevant. Deliberately, nothing relevant. 15 people had built this, and none of them were here yet. They were staged across 3 separate sectors, holding positions, waiting on her signal. But I could read them in the architecture of the place. I could read them in her. She'd laid her intelligence across the floor of a cleared inner room. Not paper, nothing so recoverable, but a composite of scratched notation on material salvaged from the ruins themselves, floor sections, wall fragments, the flat reverse face of a former structural panel. The notation was dense. It used a hybrid system I didn't recognize at first, and then I did. Standard Terran cartographic shorthand mixed with what I eventually identified as the logistics coding protocol from the Colonial Resource Management curriculum. The curriculum taught to children being trained to run infrastructure. So she'd taken what she'd been taught to manage a colony and used it to map a target. You're not going to be able to read most of it, she said, which was both true and not the point she thought it was. I'm reading enough, I said. She was eating something. A compression ration, the military issue type, which told me her contacts included someone with supply access, or the willingness to steal from someone with supply access, neither of which was reassuring. She ate without looking at it. The way people eat when eating stopped being about food a long time ago. Tell me the plan, I said. Why? Because in 2 days, I either help you or I hand you to a surface unit, and I'd like to make an informed decision. She ate the rest of her ration. Set the wrapper somewhere precise and particular, the way she set everything. Not neatness, something more deliberate than neatness. Hub 7 runs on a 3-cycle rotation, she said. Supply convoys in, distribution out. The distribution network branches at 3 junction nodes before it reaches the garrison clusters. The junctions are automated. They're not garrisoned, they're just infrastructure. She walked to the nearest floor panel and pointed. The hub itself has a perimeter security unit, 17 personnel on a standard rotation, 40-meter sensor arrays, ground level and atmospheric. Standard Verith garrison support configuration. You've been inside before? It wasn't quite a question. You don't describe the interior sensor array configuration of a facility from the outside. 3 months ago, she said. I went in as a trader. It's neutral territory, technically open to registered commercial traffic. I had documentation. Forged. Prepared, she said, and there was enough precision in the distinction that I didn't push it. And I confirmed the layout, identified the central distribution control node, mapped the redundancy architecture. She paused. They serve very bad food in the transit zone. The Verith staff looked miserable. I looked at her. Relevant detail, she said, with a tone that was not quite dry, but was definitely adjacent to it. Miserable staff make errors. They take longer to verify credentials. They want to finish their shift. It was not a joke. It was analysis delivered in the register of a joke because she knew which container was easier to carry. The plan, I said again. She walked me through it. It took 40 minutes. I asked 7 questions. She had answers for 5 of them immediately, and for the other 2 she showed me where the variables lived. Not I don't know, but this is the range of possible outcomes, and here is how each one gets handled. She spoke the way someone speaks when they've gone over something. So many times it's become structural, part of how they breathe. By the end of it, I understood 3 things. First, the plan was not reckless. It was meticulous in a way that made my professional spine do something uncomfortable, because I spent my career building operational frameworks, and this 19-year-old had built one in a bombed-out ruin that I could not find significant fault with. Second, it could still go very wrong. Not because of errors in the plan, but because the plan required 15 people who had each survived the worst day of their lives to coordinate without breaking, without the grief cracking through at the wrong moment, without the survival instincts that had kept them alive for 14 months, overriding the shared objective at a critical juncture. Third, and this is the one I've thought about most since, in the way you think about a word you've never understood until you hear it used correctly. 15 people had been living for 14 months toward a single purpose, and the purpose was not destruction for its own sake. Hub 7 going dark for 32 days did not kill anyone. It disrupted supply. It destabilized garrison readiness. It was, structurally, the largest non-lethal disruptive action available to a group of 15 unaffiliated individuals with limited resources. They'd chosen the largest available action that didn't require them to become what had been done to them. I needed another terrible brew very badly. I didn't have one. I stood in the ruins and felt it. On the 3rd day, I called Sorath. She picked up on the first signal, which meant she'd been waiting. That was not a good sign. Sorath waiting is Sorath having already made a decision and needing to deliver it. "Oh," she said. "Director, your 3-day window is closed. Well, the surface unit deploys in 4 hours. I need an extension. You need..." A sound I can only describe as Sorath's entire body expressing displeasure in unison. "Sub-Commander, you were sent to assess a surveillance flag on an unregistered refugee. 3 days. Those were your terms. The situation is more complex than an unregistered refugee. Then bring her in." "I can't." Silence. The expensive kind. "Explain can't," Sorath said, each word placed like a charge. This was the part I'd been sitting with since my first cold, terrible brew of the day. Since before dawn in a former school building where I'd slept 4 hours on debris and had a dream I couldn't quite recover that left me feeling scraped out. "She has a network," I said. 14 additional individuals, similarly displaced, similarly motivated. They are in staged positions across multiple sectors. I paused. "Director, if we send a surface unit and take her into custody, and we do not know where the others are. We do not have their positions. We cannot contain all 15 simultaneously." Another silence. "And if we don't send a surface unit," Sorath said slowly, "and these 15 individuals execute whatever they're planning, Hub 7 goes dark for 32 days. I heard her breathe. Verath Logistics Hub, I said. One of 3 main distribution nodes for their holdover garrison cluster on Keth Reach. Non-lethal disruption. No structural demolition. They've deliberately architected it around the distribution control systems, not around the garrison supply itself. 32 days of reduced operational capacity for 3 garrison clusters while their logistics chain reroutes. And what, Sorath said very carefully, does reduced operational capacity for 3 Verath garrison clusters accomplish in the current political landscape? I said nothing. She knew the landscape. We both knew the landscape. The resolution had been clean and diplomatic and dressed in the language of healing. The Verath holdover garrisons on Keth Reach were not technically prohibited under its terms. The Council had called them transitional peacekeeping infrastructure. 32 days of degraded supply wasn't catastrophic. It was pressure. The kind of pressure that made transitional infrastructure feel inconvenient to maintain. The kind of pressure that cost the Council nothing to not have applied. She did this math, I said. A 19-year-old with a cartography degree who spent 14 months in the field did this math without anyone helping her. Sorath was quiet for a long time. Sub-Commander All, she said, I need to be explicit. This conversation is not happening. Understood. I am not authorizing an intelligence officer to provide operational support to an unregistered civilian action. Understood. My surface unit will deploy in 4 hours. And if they find no one to detain in the area, that will simply be what happened. The line went dark. I stood in the ruins. Something shifted in the building above. Structural, routine. A piece of former ceiling redistributing its relationship with gravity. 4 hours. I went to find Mara Cole. She was exactly where I'd left her, which I'd told myself meant she'd kept her word and later realized might have also meant she'd known I was coming back. 4 hours, I said. She looked up, not surprised. Surface unit, I said. After that, I can't do anything. She nodded once, turned to her mapped floor panels, began to move through them in a specific sequence, not packing them up, activating them, working through some internal checklist with the contained efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment enough times that it had become reflex. You're signaling your people, I said. Yes. I watched her work. She had a handheld relay unit. Where she'd gotten it, I didn't ask, had stopped asking. And she moved through a transmission sequence that was brief and coded, and I could only follow about half of it. What do you need? I said. It came out without the interrogative lift. A statement. I noticed this and did not amend it. She looked at me for a moment. The perimeter rotation schedule, she said. Current one. What I have is 6 weeks old. My intelligence access included current perimeter rotation schedules for every installation in the monitored neutral zone network. Hub 7 was in the monitored neutral zone network. If I give you that, I said, you understand what I'm... Yes, she said. Mara, I understand what it costs you, she said. I'm not going to pretend I don't. She set down the relay unit, faced me fully, which she didn't always do. Her attention was usually distributed. The monitoring, reading the room's edges and exits. Facing me fully was a deliberate thing. I'm also not going to tell you it's the right thing. You'll have to decide that. That's not helpful. No, she agreed. It's honest. I pulled my operational access. Ran a query I could technically justify on 17 different grounds, none of which were the actual ground. Transmitted the current perimeter rotation to her relay unit. She received it and integrated it into her floor panels with that same contained efficiency. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Do it right. Don't get your people killed. That's the plan. The plan has variables. Everything has variables. She was already moving, not rushing, something smoother than rushing, like water finding a route. Variables are just problems you haven't solved yet. 19-year-old philosophy, I muttered. 20, she said, without turning around. As of this morning, I stood in the ruins for a moment after she'd gone. The pale tiles, the absent walls, the light coming through where ceilings used to be. Then I walked out to intercept my surface unit and spend the next 4 hours constructing the most detailed and technically accurate report about a cleared area that I'd ever filed in my career. I monitored Hub 7 from a relay station 7 kilometers out. It started at 0340 local, the low watch window, skeleton crew, the gap between the third and first rotation where Mara's 6-week-old data and my current update would overlap. I watched the sensor grid, watched it not trigger, still nothing. A flicker, perimeter sensor 4, southeastern approach. It registered, logged, did not escalate, which meant it had read something and categorized it as non-threat, which meant something had passed through the perimeter and been correctly identified as part of the expected environment. As I had no idea how they'd done that, I still don't. The distribution control node went offline. Not dramatically, not an explosion or a cascade failure or anything that would read as an attack on initial assessment. It went offline the way an old system goes offline, quietly, in stages, like something that had simply reached the end of its operational cycle and decided to stop. It took the hub's automated operations team 9 minutes to determine this was not a maintenance cycle. By then, by 0410, 3 of the 4 junction nodes had followed it down. I muttered something into my log that I will not repeat here. The hub spent the next 2 hours in escalating controlled panic, running diagnostics on systems that were offline in ways the diagnostics weren't designed to understand, calling in their technical unit, running it again. By 0600, they'd identified the nature of the disruption. Was by 700, they'd identified that remediation would require physical restoration of components that were no longer in their expected locations. I sat with my cold grey brew. I'd brought my own this time, a decision that was its own kind of surrender. And I watched a Verith logistics installation try to figure out how 15 human survivors had put it methodically, non-lethally, and with impressive precision out of commission for what would turn out to be 37 days. Of 5 days longer than the estimate. I thought about variables being problems you haven't solved yet. I thought about a school with clean floors and a cartography program. At 0743, I filed my overnight report. System irregularities detected in neutral zone. Ongoing assessment. No personnel incidents, no casualties. All of that was true. At 0744, I drank my terrible brew. Also true. Also, in its way, deserved. The investigation took 11 days. I want to be precise about this because precision is what I have left. 11 days. 4 investigative panels. 1 formal review of my operational conduct during the Sector 4 assignment, cross-referencing my reports against sensor data, against the surface unit's after-action findings, against the timeline of Hub 7's disruption. They didn't find anything. Not because there was nothing to find. There was, if you knew how to look. Which meant there was, if any investigator with my specific background and my specific clearances looked at it long enough. But the formal review didn't have my background or my clearances, and the 4 investigative panels were working from a framework that assumed the disruption had been either internally generated or executed by a sophisticated coordinated military cell. Because the alternative framework, 15 civilian survivors, no military background, the 14 months of self-directed field intelligence work, and a girl with a cartography degree who had turned a colony curriculum into an operational doctrine, did not fit the assumption template. I've spent some time thinking about how much of security depends on what gets assumed. On the 12th day, Director Sorath called me into her office. She has a plant there, an actual living thing, which is notable on a forward base where biological maintenance requires specific effort. It's something broad-leafed and very green and looks aggressively out of place in a space that is otherwise all surface materials and operational grey. I've never asked about it. She's never explained it. We have an unspoken agreement that the plant exists outside of professional discourse. She looked at me across her desk. I had my full report prepared. I had filed it that morning. Thorough, accurate, as a masterwork of technically true information that did not include the things that would end my career. 11 days, she said. Yes, Director. The investigative panel found no evidence of coordinated external actor involvement in the Hub 7 disruption. That was their finding, I agreed. Hub 7 is now 37 days into remediation, Sorath said. Garrison supply to 3 Keth Reach clusters is disrupted at 63% capacity. The 2 of those garrison commanders have filed formal complaints with the Verath High Council. A pause. The Council is reviewing the terms under which those garrisons are permitted to maintain their presence. I saw the dispatch. The Political Affairs Division is calling it a significant development. I said nothing. The plant was very green. Sub-Commander All, Sorath said. I want to ask you a professional question. Director, during your 9-day field assignment in Sector 4, in the course of monitoring the surveillance target, did you transmit any restricted operational data to an unregistered civilian party? The plant. Green. Unreasonably alive in a room that should not support it. No, I said. Sorath held my gaze for a very long moment. She had 4 arms and 0 patience, and eyes that were very good at applying sustained pressure to things that had structural weaknesses. No, she said. No, I said. She looked at me one more moment. Then she picked up my report, set it in her filing system. The gesture of closure. There's a debrief at 1400 on the Keth Reach political situation, she said. Given your recent field experience in the neutral zone, your perspective may be useful. I'll be there, I said, and I was halfway to the door when she spoke again. All. I stopped. That plant, she said, was a gift from a colleague who died on Sector 9, before the resolution. A pause. I water it every day. I left without answering because there was nothing to say to that, and I think she knew it. I found Mara Cole 3 weeks later. Not through surveillance. I'd made a quiet administrative decision to let her drop out of the tracking system, which I justified on a sequence of technical grounds that would survive cursory scrutiny and collapse under sustained examination. I found her through a contact in the Refugee Integration Network who owed me a favor, and the favor was, tell me if any of the Sector 9 pre-resolution survivors make contact with the official support system. She hadn't. But one of her people had, a young man, Terran male, registered as Dane Reeve, who'd walked into Integration Center Veth 4 and asked about the process for formalizing an unregistered civilian intelligence initiative under Inter-Allied Cooperative Framework Law. Which was, I had to look this up, an actual legal provision. Obscure, designed in the post-consolidation period for exactly the kind of situation where civilian populations with critical information needed to interface with official structures without surrendering their legal autonomy. Dane Reeve had done the research. He had known about this provision. He had walked in with the application prepared. I met Mara Cole in a transit hub on the Keth system's main civilian routing station. She was sitting at a terminal in the transit waiting area, not visibly doing anything, which meant she was doing everything without wanting to be seen doing it. I bought 2 beverages from the transit kiosk, real ones this time, something warm and amber-colored that smelled like something roasted, an actual beverage for actual consumption, and sat across from her. I put one in front of her. She looked at it, looked at me. You tracked me, she said. Dane Reeve is not subtle. He's learning. She picked up the drink, tested it cautiously, the way people who have been living on compression rations test things that taste like they were made by someone who cared. He's learning a lot of things. They all are. What happens next? I asked. Hub 7 comes back online in approximately 6 days, she said. We have been observing the political response. The Verath Council is reviewing the Keth Reach garrison terms. Yes? She wasn't smiling, but the almost smile shape was there. The one that never fully arrived. The one that made it most of the way. The review was triggered by 2 garrison commanders filing formal complaints. The complaints were filed because their supply chain was disrupted for 37 days. The disruption happened because... I know what happened, I said. Right. She turned her drink in her hands. We want to do it again. I looked at her. Not Hub 7, she said. Hub 7 is remediated. But there are 2 other distribution nodes in the holdover network, and now we understand the architecture. And now we have a pause, careful, experience. You also, I said, have a legal cooperative framework application filed under Dane Reeves' name. That's a backup. A backup for what? She looked at me directly, the reading look, the assessment that had catalogued me in a bombed-out ruin the first time we'd spoken. For if anything goes wrong, she said, for if we lose someone, for if the variables don't solve the way we expect. A beat. 14 months alone is a long time. We've done what we could alone. But she stopped, reconsidered, started differently. My father used to say that doing something alone when you don't have to is just arrogance with different packaging. I thought about her file. 17 pages, 4 of them damage reports. I didn't ask about her father. She didn't elaborate. What do you need? I said. Again with the missing interrogative. Again, I didn't correct it. I need someone with restricted operational access and a professional reason to be interested in neutral zone logistics activity, she said. Someone who is not officially affiliated with us. Someone who, if they were, hypothetically, to observe patterns in supply chain infrastructure and flag them through appropriate intelligence channels, could do so with full institutional cover. I drank my amber beverage. It was good. Genuinely good. I'd forgotten what that was like. You're asking me to be your intelligence infrastructure, I said. I'm asking you, she said, to keep watching. The way you were already watching. The way I was watching almost got you intercepted and detained. And then it didn't, she said, because you made a choice. I could make a different choice next time. You could. She met my eyes. But you won't. The transit hub moved around us. The ordinary flow of travel. Beings in transit between places, the low-level noise of logistics in motion. Somewhere nearby, a cargo designation was being called. Something being routed to somewhere. The infrastructure of a galaxy that kept running regardless of what happened in its corners. What's in the other 2 hubs? I asked. She told me. It took 20 minutes. I had follow-up questions. She had answers for most of them. The others, she showed me where the variables lived. I filed an intelligence assessment when I got back to the forward base. Neutral zone supply chain irregularities. Ongoing observation recommended. Request for extended monitoring authorization. As Sorath approved it inside 40 minutes. She didn't comment on it. She didn't have to. I want to be honest about what this has cost me, because I think dishonesty about cost is its own kind of damage. My career is a careful construction. 12 years, 3 citations, a set of professional habits and ethical boundaries that I built deliberately and maintained deliberately, and have largely dismantled over the course of 3 weeks in a bombed-out neutral zone, talking to a girl who was sitting in the 3rd row of a cartography class when the sky turned a color with no name. I don't sleep the way I used to sleep. I sit with my terrible brew and I run the variables, her variables, the ones that don't solve immediately, the range of outcomes and how each one gets handled. The ones where something goes wrong. The ones where I get the call I don't want to get. I also water a plant that I've bought for my own office. It's not as large as Sorath's. It's the same type. I don't fully understand why I bought it. It sits in the corner and it is aggressively out of place. And I water it every day because it requires maintenance. And maintenance requires attention. And attention is a way of refusing to let something become a damage report. These are the things I know. 3 garrison clusters on Keth Reach are currently at 63% supply capacity, and the Verath Council is reviewing terms under political pressure they cannot entirely account for. 15 human survivors with no institutional affiliation did that, in 32 days. 37 counting variables. Mara Cole is 20 years old as of recently, and she turned a colonial resource management curriculum into an operational doctrine, and she gave me a beverage and asked me to keep watching. And here is what I cannot tell you, what I have no clean language for, no intelligence framework that boxes it correctly. I don't know if what she's doing is right, but I know what right looks like in the language I was trained in. It has clear parameters. It operates through sanctioned channels. It justifies itself with chain of command logic and institutional mandate, and the larger picture that someone above your clearance level has assessed and determined. I know what the resolution looked like in that language. It looked correct, clean, diplomatically structured, never again. I know what Sector 9 looks like in that language. Myra, it looks like a damage report. 4 pages. Population registry, incomplete. Event. Mara Cole is not operating in that language. She built her own. She built it out of cartography and grief, and 14 months and 48 dead children, and a classroom that had clean floors, and a girl in the 3rd row. And the language she built has a word for never again that is not a banner and not a ceremony and not a diplomatic term. I don't know if it's right. I know that I keep watching. I know that the next hub goes dark in 12 days, by my estimate. I know that somewhere in a transit station or a staging position or the ruins of something that used to have walls, 19, 15, she never counts herself, people are solving variables. I know that I filed for extended monitoring authorization, and Sorath approved it in 40 minutes, and neither of us said a word about why. I know that my plant is very green, which is irrational given the light conditions in my office, and that I water it anyway. And I know, I'll tell you this honestly, and then I'll stop. When I sat in that transit hub and she said you won't, meaning I wouldn't make a different choice, she was right. Not because she'd convinced me, not because I'd run the ethics through a framework and arrived at a satisfying conclusion. Because some things, once you've seen them, once you've stood in a room with clean floor tiles and absent walls, and understood in your body, rather than your assessment module, what event means in the language that replaces people with damage reports, some things don't let you look away. She's 20 years old. She has 12 days. I'm going to keep watching.